Hey everyone, my name is Tristan and welcome to my workshop. In my last video, I showed you how you can make your own Phase 2 Clone Trooper helmet out of EVA foam using the templates available on my Etsy store. And in this video, I'll show you how I painted mine to look like one of the clones from the Clone Wars TV show. Now, if you want to build this helmet for yourself, you can check out my last video and maybe purchase the templates available on my Etsy store for pretty cheap. The link is in the description below. In this video, I'll show you some pretty cool tricks and techniques which you might not have seen before, so it'll be pretty interesting. So let's not waste any time and get right into it. Here's the helmet almost as we left it in the last video. As you can see, there's filler right there, and that's because while further heat sealing my foam, I burnt it a bit. So while I was at it, I decided to also fill the seam on those two pieces at the back, but now let's start with the video. Before doing anything to the helmet, let's cut out the visor. I didn't do this in the last video because I don't want the face to deform over time. So this is one of the last things you should do before priming. As you can see, I go very slowly and I have a brand new blade. I really don't want to mess up at this stage. To remove the imperfections in my cuts, I take out some 120 grit sandpaper and I carefully sand down the edges and corner in the visor. And finally, to smooth out the sanded surfaces, I heat them up with my heat gun. As you can see, this protruding piece will prevent the visor from sitting flush with the teeth, so I'm just gonna remove it. Now the helmet is ready for priming. You could totally use Mod Podge or Plastidip. I'm gonna use Leak Seal, which is similar to Plastidip but way cheaper here in Canada. Now the weird thing with Leak Seal is that if you want to avoid getting a texture, you either have to apply lots of very light coats or one really heavy coat. I went with the first option because I was scared of getting drips, but I got impatient, sprayed a thicker coat than I should have, and I got a texture. So I let it dry completely, and off camera I sprayed one heavy coat over it, which mostly fixed my mistake. And it looks pretty good. But there's still a bunch of seams and imperfections that needed fixing, and everyone knows the only way to do that is filling and sanding. So I got my sanding sponges out from 120 to 320 grit, and I got to work. The goal with this first sanding pass is simply to get rid of the high points from uneven seams. Now it's time to fill in those seams. You could totally use Quick Seal, but I like using this Liquitex light modeling paste. You can apply it on your seams and imperfections with your finger. Make sure not to add too much or else you'll get a peak, which is worse than leaving your seams unfilled. To smooth out the filler, dip your finger in water and go over your seam to completely level it out. When it dries, the filler shrinks around 10%, so it's a good idea to add a second layer. Wait a couple of hours for the filler to dry and then take out your sanding sponges. The goal here is to remove the excess filler to get rid of that little peak I was talking about earlier. Now that the helmet is mostly seamless, a cool trick is to cover it with automotive primer. This is gonna give the helmet a uniform color and it's gonna reveal the smallest of imperfections. If you use filler primer, you can even get rid of some of those imperfections. I couldn't find any, so regular primer is gonna have to do it for me. Because it dries so fast, you can empty the whole can in one thick coat if you want. I only used around half of mine. This is how the helmet looks when it's dry. Now all the imperfections will be super visible. So it's time for one more round of filling and sanding. I start by getting rid of those high spots with my 180 grit sanding sponge. Then the low spots get filled in with the flexible filler from earlier, and of course I smooth it out with water. And finally, once it's all dry, I do my final pass of sanding. I'm very careful at this point because if I rip the filler, I have to start all over again. You could paint the helmet now, but I want a nice uniform layer to paint over, so for that I like to use Mod Podge. It's made to be used as is, but to be extra sure I don't get any brush strokes, I'll dilute it with a little bit of water. I simply apply it thinly all over the helmet and I use 2 coats. Once it's completely dry, I quickly go over it with 220 and 320 grit sandpaper to get rid of the final remaining texture. It's finally time to paint the helmet. I'm using Rust-Oleum 2X semi-gloss white because I've had good results with it in the past. I only apply 2 thin coats 15 minutes apart, and I make sure to hit every spot on the helmet and get complete coverage everywhere. This is how the helmet looks in white. It's a bit too glossy for my taste, but I'm gonna clear coat it later so it doesn't matter. Now let's paint the black and gray parts on the helmet. I'm just gonna use acrylic paints and masking tape to make the process easier. I also keep a reference image nearby to avoid any mistakes. I start with the gray band that wraps around the back of the helmet. Then I paint the ear details the same color. A hairdryer is great to dry the paint really fast and save lots of time. Next is the black trim that wraps all around the helmet. Some of the corners were harder to get to, and a detail brush helps a lot. Then I painted the teeth. The lower spots were black and the teeth themselves are gray. Masking tape was crucial for this step. And by the way, I applied 3 coats for every color. The final pieces to paint are the 3 lower vents, and they're painted black. And that helmet looks good. For the 9 blue strips on each side of the helmet, I use electrical tape because it sticks great to paint. I laid it on a small cutting mat and used a metal ruler to guide my cuts. I simply cut lots of thin strips. Then I carefully stuck them on using my X-Acto for a more precise placement. Now let's protect all that hard work. I'm using a satin clear coat from Rust-Oleum. Using satin instead of matte was a mistake, and you'll see why in a bit. As much as I like the clean look of the helmet, I want to weather it. And I recently got a new fancy tool called an airbrush. It's the cheapest model I could find, and I don't even use airbrush paint with it. I just take out some acrylic paint and I mix it with water to give it the consistency of milk. I was kind of scared to use the airbrush on my helmet because I don't have much experience airbrushing. I made sure the paint consistency and my settings were right, and then I got to work. And then I realized my mistake. The paint doesn't stick to a glossy surface. That's why it took me so many layers to paint on the details earlier. If you're following this video, just use a matte paint for the whole process. So I took out my matte clear coat and I sprayed on a light coat over the helmet. With that mistake fixed, I could get back to airbrushing. The goal here is to add shading in the corners and give the helmet more definition and mimic the accumulation of dirt. I maybe went a bit overboard, but I like the look. As you can see, the corners stayed a bit lighter than the rest, but that will get fixed in the next step. And that step is good old-fashioned weathering. A big brush and a bunch of black paint mixed in with water is all you need. Cover the helmet in paint and then remove most of it with paper towels. This step can totally replace the shading if you don't have an airbrush. The helmet looks pretty good just like this, but I'd like it to have more color. Like that trooper has seen a lot accumulating dirt from different planets. So I mix a bunch of colors together, put some on my brush, and then wipe most of it away on a paper towel. Now I can stipple down the color onto the helmet, being strategic with the placement. When I'm done, I go over the helmet one last time with the airbrush to mute those bright colors a little bit. To protect my work, I spray the helmet with a thick layer of matte clear coat. The final step is to make the visor. I bought a tinted visor online, but it's green, which is great if you want to make Commander Grease helmet, but I'm making a regular trooper. So I'll just cover it with window tint. I kept the original visor piece that I removed from the start of the video, and I'll use it as a reference to make a new one. I trace it down on paper, enlarge it by ½ inch all the way around, and then cut it out. I cover the face shield in masking tape to protect it, and I trace the template down on it. Then I cut out that template and remove the masking tape. I spray soapy water on the visor and carefully apply the tint. Then I use a piece of foam to squeegee out the water. And finally, I remove the excess tint. To help the visor stick to the helmet, I remove about 1/4 inch of the tint all the way around and carefully sand down the edges. Finally, I put hot glue inside the helmet and stick the visor in place. Now you should have your own completed foam Phase 2 Clone Trooper helmet. So this is the final result, and although it took a while to get it to this point, I think it's really worth it. This paint job turned out better than I expected, which is pretty rare for me. But there you have it, a completed Phase 2 clone helmet with a Clone Wars inspired paint job. And as I said at the start of the video, the templates are available for pretty cheap on my Etsy store, so you can follow along and build your own. Also, if you want to see more of what I do, things that don't always make it into my videos, follow me on Instagram. The link is in the description below. So this is the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, you can leave a like and subscribe to my channel for more cool stuff like this. If you want to build a Clone Trooper helmet but you prefer the Phase 1, Cosplay Apprentice has an awesome video showing you exactly how to build one, and he has templates. And you know how Rex's Phase 2 helmet is pretty much just a Phase 1 and Phase 2 combined together? Well, using Skylar's templates and mine to create one might be a fun project. Maybe I'll make one in the future, who knows. But until my next video, I'll see you later, bye.